Hello and welcome to another motorcycling video. For context, today is Wednesday the 8th of February 2024 and it's about 6 o'clock in the morning, hence the street lights are still on and it's slightly dark, or the sun hasn't quite come up yet. And for purposes of explanation, I'm off on my Spyder going to a place where I can start my morning run. Now that might seem a bit silly, but sometimes you just need a change of scenery when you're running. So running the same track every day straight out your door is a bit boring, so you need a change of scenery. Plus I also wanted to make some footage for this video for today. As you can see then, I'm back in Goulburn on the Spyder after having been in Tasmania riding the Suzuki Bergman for a while. So I needed to get used to some of the three-wheel riding skills again, and that was another excuse to get on the bike and take a ride. So as you can see by today's title, I'm going to talk about infotainment screens in cars. And you might wonder what that has to do with motorcycles, and this is a motorcycle vlog after all. But hopefully when I've talked about the topic and pulled all the strands together, you will see the connection between these infotainment screens and motorcycling and general road safety. So I'll start the discussion or the video by posing a couple of questions. Number one, does your vehicle have an infotainment screen? That's one of those screens that looks like an iPad or an Android tablet and has as many options and settings and choices as an iPad tablet or an Android tablet, as opposed to perhaps just a small screen that's in front of the driver that has basic information about the car's performance. The second question is, if your vehicle does have an infotainment screen, does it have a voice-operated assistant like a Siri or an Alexa or something like that? Now, an answer to that question for me is no, my vehicle does not have an infotainment screen. It's a 2010 Toyota Camry hybrid, and infotainment screens were not in cars at that time, and so because it doesn't have the screen, it doesn't have the voice operated assistant either. Now I should say that my information and my knowledge and understanding of how these screens work and the systems that they use is based on watching lots and lots of car reviews on YouTube from people who work for drive.com, .com.au, carsguide.com.au, chasingcars.com.au, therightcar.com.au, and also a guy who specialises in reviewing electric cars called Ludicrous Feed. These are people who make a living out of reviewing cars, and this is not a criticism of them, not necessarily even a criticism of the vehicles or the screens itself. It's just to talk about them and pose some questions that I think are at least worthy of some consideration. So the infotainment screen is becoming almost the default setting in cars. Many cars now have two screens, a smaller one that's directly behind the steering wheel, like the traditional set of gauges and dials that you have in a car, that gives the driver the basic information about how the car is operating, what speed it's going at, the odometer, the trip meter if you need one, the energy consumption per 100 kilometres or whatever it is, and things like that. Now there is a second screen which is generally set to the left of the driver and which can be about the size of a small iPad, or I think in the case of Teslas and perhaps the BYD Atto 3, a standard size iPad, and in the case of the BYD Atto 3 it rotates through landscape and portrait settings. Now all of the people who review cars, their job is to get in a car and drive it and tell you about its features, and of course these screens are a big feature of cars these days. So they talk about the functionality, in other words what things you can do with the screen, including whether it has Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, I think that's what they're called. They talk about the size of the screen, they talk about whether there's any glare or whether it's difficult to see certain features in direct sunlight and so on. And they talk about the responsiveness of the screen. In other words, is there some delay between you tapping on an icon on the screen and the screen doing whatever it is you asked it to do? It's a prominent feature of the car and it's worth commenting on. Many cars these days have a whole suite of safety features which are now referred to as ADAS, which stands for automated driver assistance safety systems, and they include things like the lane keeper assist, the rear pedestrian alert, the blind spot monitoring, and things like the speed sign recognition. Many of the people who review cars comment on those particular systems, and they either note that the systems are intrusive and poorly calibrated, and that they sound alarms unnecessarily, and they want to be able to turn those alarms off. Now, as I explained in an earlier video, those alarms and safety features are fitted to cars these days, so the cars will get the 5-star ANCAP rating. They're expected to be operational by default, otherwise what would be the point of putting them in there? And they are not able to be disabled permanently for the same reason. What would be the point of putting them in there if you could permanently disable them? Now, yes, they can be disabled, but by default they are turned on. So owners of cars need to learn very quickly that every time you get in the car, if you've turned the engine off, when you turn it back on, you've got to go through the menus and you've got to turn off the things that you don't like, the alarms that you find annoying and irritating. Now let's take a scenario that you're driving through a built-up area in your car. Many of these things apply to electric vehicles, but they're not exclusive to electric vehicles. But you're driving through a built-up area in your car, and the speed sign recognition system alarm keeps going off. How these things work, as I understand, is that the car has a series of cameras, and there's a camera somewhere at the front of the car that recognises a speed sign, sends the information to the car's computer, and the car's computer computes and recognises you are either exceeding the speed limit and therefore automatically slows the car down, or in most cases sounds an alarm. Now imagine, as I said, you're going through a built-up area where the speed limit could be 40 for a school zone, then you're outside the school zone so it goes up to 50, but then you come into a aged care area, for example, and the speed limit might go down to 30 kilometres an hour. And so the speed limit is frequently changing, and so the alarm could be frequently going off because you just cannot keep the speed according to whatever the sign is that the camera is recognising, and the alarm keeps going off. And you get irritated by this thing and you want to turn it off. Now, if you know that this thing is going to go off and you know that it's going to be an annoyance to you, when you get in the car, you go into the menu, into the settings, and you disable it. But you forgot to do that because you were in a hurry and you wanted to get going where you were going and so on. And now the thing is going off and it's driving you bonkers and you want to turn it off. So you've got to reach over to the screen and get out of the screen that you're in by swiping. I'm not sure if it's left or right. So let's suppose you're in the GPS system at the moment. The alarm still goes off, but you're using the GPS to navigate you somewhere. So you've got to swipe out of the GPS to the home screen. Then you've got to tap the settings. When the settings menu comes up, you're going to have a look across and make sure that it actually responded when you tapped it, because sometimes those screens don't respond or there's a delay. So you're looking across to see if it responded. Then comes up a host of menus, a sub-menu, and now you've got to navigate down the sub-menu and find speed sign recognition, and you find that one and you tap on it again, and so you look over at the screen again to make sure that you tap the right one and make sure that the screen, the tablet responded to whatever tap you made, and then you've got to see turn on or disable or whatever it is, that the terminology that your particular car uses, and you've got to tap on that and turn it off. Now imagine that you are driving through, as I said, a built-up area, school zone, you're doing 40 kilometres an hour, and to work your way through all those menus, you might have to take your eye off the road for as much as 10 seconds, perhaps even longer, maybe even shorter, but perhaps even longer than 10 seconds. A mathematician, not me, but a mathematician will be able to work out how many metres or 100 metres you travel in those 10 seconds that your eyes are off the road at 40 kilometres an hour. Now imagine that a kid steps out onto the road because they just feel like crossing the road and they don't feel like losing the school crossing, or the car in front of you suddenly stops, or some other thing happens and your eyes have been off the road for up to 10 seconds. The autonomous emergency braking might operate? Yes. It might not. The car behind you might not have autonomous emergency braking, and therefore they run up your backside. So there's a whole bunch of implications of you taking your eyes off the road to attend to this irritating noise that you want disabled. Now imagine if you had a number of those systems, such as the rear pedestrian alert, the lane keeper assist, the speed sign recognition, to just name 3 of them, and even the driver fatigue camera that keeps noticing that you're looking away from the road to the screen. It keeps beeping at you, and you want to turn them all off. But you forgot to do that before you got in the car. So every time you want to turn something off, now you've got to take your eyes off the road and you've got to look at the screen. Now you might say, well, I know where the settings icon is, and yes, you do. You might well know where that is, but you don't necessarily know that when you tapped on it, the screen automatically responded. And because we're visual people, we look over and see what happened on the screen. And then because there are sub-menus, we look over at the screen again to find the menu we want. All right, so I've identified the problem. The problem is that people's eyes will be taken off the road to attend to the infotainment screen. Now, many of the functions of the car now only happen through that screen. There used to be buttons or knobs or switches that you could push on the dashboard or on the steering wheel, but in many cars now, because there's a tablet, all of those things have been taken away. And so even things like perhaps turning up the temperature a degree or 2, or turning up the fan 1 notch or 2, are now in sub-menus within the main screen. So every time you want to do something now, you've got to take your eyes off the road, and that's a danger. You're now driving down the road in your electric vehicle, let's say, or even your non-electric vehicle that can weigh up to 2 ton or more. You're travelling at 40 kilometres an hour or even more, and your eyes are off the road for 10 or 12 seconds or perhaps even more. All right, so I've identified the problem. What are the solutions? Well, you can't have a simple set and forget system, because there will be times when you will want to adjust the temperature because it got colder outside, or you had it up high and it got warm, and you want to turn the temperature down now, or you want to put the air conditioning on when it wasn't on before, and you have to do all this stuff through the screen. So the set and forget won't work. So a couple of options. One is to say, well, you've got to do all that stuff before the car gets going. You can only do it while the car is stationary. Now that's fine if you're in your garage and you set all these things up before you go. You could do that. It's not practical to say, well, just pull over on the motorway when you're on your way home, because you're in a queue of traffic, and you know if you pull over onto the shoulder, you're probably never going to get back onto the road again. So pulling over onto the shoulder to adjust all those things and then get back into the traffic is probably not an option either. So another option might be to say, well, those things that you want to do, many of those functions are now greyed out. They're unavailable. They're just not. You just cannot make those adjustments while the car's in motion. So the only thing to do is either stop the car and do it, or do it before you started the car, or stop the car and do it, or you just can't do it. Now that doesn't sound very sensible, as I said, because you might want to bump up the temperature, or put on the air conditioning, or change the radio station, or the podcast you're listening to is finished and you want the next one, or whatever it is. So there may genuinely be times when you want to work with some of these controls, so greying them out may not be a sensible thing. And that's where the voice-operated commands might come in. I know, for example, that the BYD, at least the Atto 3, but I'm not sure about some of the other models, has a voice-activated system where you can give it some of the basic commands and it will turn up the fan, or turn up the temperature, or lower the window if you want the window down, or something like that. I'm not sure how extensive that system is, but surely it is a system. It is possible for the manufacturers of vehicles, when they're designing the software, to say, well, the only way this can work while the vehicle is in motion is through voice-activated commands, and develop their own assistant, be it a Siri or an Alexa or Cortana or whatever they want to call it, that accepts that there are a range of things that can be done while the vehicle's in motion, but they can only be done by a voice-operated command, and that there are some systems that you just cannot turn off once the car is in motion. So if you have to have the speed sign recognition turned off, then turn it off before you start the car, otherwise it stays on. If you have to have the lane keeper assistant turned off, turn it off before you start the car, otherwise it stays on. Now you can see, I hope, that your safety is an issue here, because anytime your eyes are not on the road, your safety is at risk. You could have an accident by running into somebody or running into a pole or whatever, but so is the safety of other people on the road, other drivers, pedestrians, cyclists, and in my case motorcyclists, who may be in the lane beside you but you're not able to see them because you turned off the lane keeper assistance and are in your blind spot or whatever, and you're fiddling around with the screen, and a motorcyclist could be involved in an accident which could result in either cosmetic damage or catastrophic damage. Well, that's my thoughts on infotainment screens. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the scenery, and I'll catch you when I'm making the next video.